to create my actual texture inside of Substance, and then I was able to bring that Substance texture inside of Maya. So as I'm working on my low resolution refinement, I can also be working on my substance texture as well. You can export an FBX model from Maya, and that can import directly into Substance Designer. You can then begin to work on your texture. If you need to make any tweaks to your FBX model, when you save those FBX changes back, Substance will automatically reload that model, and then the graph that makes up your texture will retexture your element. And then finally, in the pipeline, your Maya assets will then be exported out as FBX over into, if you're using Unreal or also the Unity engine, and then also the same exact texture that you were working with inside of Substance that you used inside of Maya will also go over to Unreal or Unity as well. Okay, so at this point, we're actually going to get into a project. So this was just started off as a personal project, something I worked on with a character I called, and his name is Mr. Grumples. And so I started off with this guy, again, created a simple base mesh inside of Maya, took that guy over into Mudbox, and then started to do my high-resolution sculpt. So the textures that you see right now were actually generated inside of Substance, and then over into my paint tools is where I started to actually add these maps. So from Substance, during the iteration processes, before I actually bake out the entire Substance or publish that, I could actually just bake out some really quick diffuse and normal and spec textures so I can kind of test my sculpt as I'm working. So it's almost like you can do two things at once. You know, you can start your sculpt at this end, you can take your low resolution data and start to build up a texture, and then kind of take some of those textures and run them into Mudbox and see how things are pulling together. Another thing that I also used in this process was in Mudbox 2014, I started to take advantage of some of the new topology tools. So what I did was I went ahead and grabbed the curve tool and started just kind of draw out some curves across this guy. So with the curve tool selected, I went on ahead and made some, I basically started to come in, this is using a mouse here, so this isn't perfect, but I started to highlight areas like, where I want to create an edge loop around this, what I call the face mask. Then also around here in the laugh lines. Also started to create some loops here around the cheek and things like that. So once I started to kind of draw out these shapes, I then went up to the mesh tools. And so now we have this new retopologize tool. And if you have curves drawn in the scene, it will automatically use those curves as a guide for retopology. So it really helped me in that sense to get a little step closer into the topology tools. And then from there, I took that back over into Maya and used the new mesh reduce tools to compress that guy all the way down to basically a game res level that I wanted to work with. So once we came back into Maya, what I ended up doing with this guy was I started to use the DirectX 11 viewport 2, and that's got to be one of my favorite features. The viewport totally rocks. It's really nice because you can get such a high quality look. You can work with tessellation, displacement mapping, and subsurface and things like that, all within your viewport without having to render. And it looks really nice. So what we'll talk about just really briefly is the Substance that we're looking at. So here I'm in my node editor, and I'm actually going to take a look at, we'll take a look at the head. So the way this works is I just generate a Substance material that's just part of a normal Maya material since the engine is embedded within the framework. And then you can see over here that I actually have a Substance material, and it's asking for a Substance file. I go and grab the Substance file that I created. It's going to generate several maps for me. So in this case of the head, I'm using diffuse, normal, spec, and emissive. And I generated these guys at a 2K texture. And then what I did was I exposed a few parameters in my Substance. So once I created that texture in Substance, I gave myself a couple of tweaks here that I could do. So for instance, specular amount, emissive amount, AO effect, and things like that. So that once I actually got this Substance texture into Maya, I never had to go back to Substance to texture again. So I could start doing all kinds of tweaks like change my specularity, change my emissive right here within inside of Maya. So what happens is once you've created the Substance material will create a couple of these Substance output nodes, which then basically, as you can see here, like here's my normal map, and then right here I just have a file texture. So it generates a file texture, and then that file texture then just links directly into the DX11 shader. So if we grab hold of the DX11 shader here, you can see that underneath of my diffuse map, it's looking at this file 4 texture, so that's basically the texture that I have coming in from Substance. So I'm using the Substance material to actually drive the effect of the DX11 shader. So what we'll look at really quick is, people, you hear a lot about substance within Maya, and not a lot of talk goes into, well, how do you actually create those substances? What does that look like? So that's kind of what I want to show you here, just explore the workflow that I went through. So I told you before I started with a high-resolution sculpt, then used Maya to create a low-resolution version of that guy. So one of the things that I did, instead of spending a lot of time on retopology, I just used the new Mesh Reduce tool in 2014, and it gave me a really nice result. And I was able to set that setting to be all quad-based, so the resulting mesh was very low, but it was also all quad-based. Now, that may not be something that I completely work with, like if I was taking this over to my game, but what it allowed me to do is just give me a really quick model that I could just work with while I'm starting to design my textures and things like that, and then maybe later on go and rework the model if I wanted to. So inside of Substance, you have a 3D view. The 3D view supports tessellation as well, so it kind of mimics the Viewport 2 DX11 shader. And so I started to create 3 graphs here. So here's my substance, and I've got a head, a shirt, and a hair. So if we go back into Maya just for a second, and I'm going to just grab hold of the substance node and go back up to my top here, you can see that in the substance graph, it's actually looking at the hair, head, and shirt. So those are the 3 graphs that I created inside of Substance Designer. So the first thing we'll take a look at is the head. And what I ended up doing was started to just use some texture painting, so some projection painting that I did inside of Mudbox, and created just like a very basic, texture for the diffuse texture of my head. So it's going to be just my color. And I bring this in as a bitmap, and then I start to do some processing with that. So if we take a look at my graph, we basically have this top area right here is going to be handling like my ambient occlusion. And this middle section right here is going to be for my subsurface map that I create. And then this bottom section right here is going to be basically handling my specularity. And then here we have the normal, and then finally we have the height map. So one of the things that I do for a workflow, especially if I'm trying to build any type of real-time information for an asset, what I'm going to do is instead of baking my maps, like say inside of Mudbox or Maya, I'm actually going to do that inside of Substance Designer. It ends up being a bit quicker to bake, and it's kind of a nice way to, I'm already in this environment to do any of my texturing, so I can just do it all within here. So if I want to, all I've got to do is just link in a model. And if we take a look at this low here, this low model, I just right-click and go to Bake Model Information. And then within Substance Designer, I have the ability to bake all these different types of maps, such as ambient occlusion, height, normal, position, and things like that. So what I ended up doing for this guy was baking out a normal map from here, and also baked out a height map that I would use for the tessellation. So after that bake, this is the map that I ended up getting from that. And so I ended up doing that right here within Designer, so I didn't actually do it in transfer maps or inside of Maya or Mudbox. And I just did a little bit of an adjustment here. So what happens is in Maya, the normal maps are working in OpenGL format. So inside the Designer, I was working with in DirectX 11 orientation, so I just used the Levels tool to flip my green channel here so that I could flip back and forth. But what I ended up doing is exposing a parameter that allowed me to switch the normal map on the fly. So depending on what application I'm in, whether it be Unity or Maya or if it was Unreal, I can change the normal format from DirectX to OpenGL on the fly. So another thing that I did was I created another bake from here. So if I go back up to my model and do some bake information, another handy bake that we can use is this convert UV to SVG. So it's going to take all of your UV islands, it's going to just colorize them basically with any color that you want. And so what I ended up doing was getting a map that looks kind of like this. So you see blue and red. And then what I did was I used this as a mask. So I passed this through a grayscale node, and just, if you can see here that I have the blue all the way up. So all I was trying to do was just take, what I ended up having was my eye texture was actually mixed into my diffuse map. So I made that decision early on, and then later I was like, I wish I wouldn't have done that. So instead of going back and having to rework my texture or anything, I just pulled this mask here using the SVG bake inside of Designer, created a mask, so it's only looking at the blue channel, so you can see here it's just going to isolate the head for me, and then I started to use that in various ways. So for instance, here in my specular, you can see that I pulled that map right into this blend node, which then acts as a mask. So it's nice that you have utilities like that, so you're not constantly having to go back and rework any textures or anything like that. You can just pull back RGB information right here inside Designer. When you use that mask again, I told you to get rid of the eye. And then I just ran through some filters here that I have with inside Designer. So if I right-click and you can see Add Node, I have a lot of ability to manipulate my image. So I have like a hue saturation, levels, things like that that you may have seen in other type of image editing applications. So I used hue saturation to kind of bring out more of an orangish tone for the subdermal level of my skin. And then I cranked that through some levels. And then I also did something here where I did a bake from Substance Designer, which is called a curvature map. So in Designer, I can just bake a curvature map, which is basically going to do a map that's like a mask. And it's going to do all of the curved areas of my mesh are going to be basically colored white, and all the crevices and creases and things are going to be dark. So if you take a look at this map here, you can see that it's a really cool way of being able to isolate wrinkles and all the crevices that are in this guy's face. So I used that map as a mask when I was working on the subsurface. So with the subsurface mask, by default, you get this when I was working through the, just using the hue saturation. Then I piped in that curvature mask to take all the crevice areas and make those a little bit darker. And then finally, right here in Designer, what I ended up doing was I used their bitmap tools. So I basically have an array of tools that I can use, painting tools. So they're pressure-sensitive brushes that I can use to paint various types of masks and things like that. So what I ended up doing was just imported in my UVs into the background, and then just used the brush tools to actually paint like a mask that I could use. So then the next thing I did was I blurred that mask, and then I placed that mask right here inside, or basically over black. And so in the end, what I ended up getting was this map right here, which is then basically my subsurface map. So this is what I'm actually going to be working with once I'm inside of Maya's DirectX 11 shader. So with here in Designer, I was able to start from this just color image that I had, and I ran it through some of the nodes, very basic nodes, hue saturation, levels, did a just slight bit of masking, painted a little mask with some brush tools, and then, within no time I was able to pull out my subsurface map. Did the same thing with specularity. So the way I create specularity maps, started with the color, started with converting it to grayscale, got rid of the eye texture again with that mask, ran it through some levels adjustments again. Another thing that I did was I utilized that curvature map. So remember before I was telling you that was a very quick way to be able to pull out all of the crevices within my map. Again, something that was really easily done by using the bake tools that are native to Substance Designer. So again, I used that as a mask. So when I was creating my specularity, if I kind of zoom in on here, you can see that I made the crevice areas, like all the wrinkles and things like that. Those are dark now, so they're not really affecting the specularity as much. Did another levels adjustment. And in the end, I ended up getting this map for my specular. Now, what I ended up doing in this, and this is another thing that really gives you the true power of Substance, when I talked earlier, is that we have these procedural textures. So what I did in this case was a traditional way of working is, say, maybe I work with Photoshop and I say, all right, I'm going to paint my specular map, and I do all this work, I save the map, I import it back into Maya, I look at it, it's not good enough. Maybe it's too specular, or maybe it's not enough. So now I go back to Photoshop, I make a tweak, save, go back into Maya, oh, I still don't like it. And I do that time and time again until I get it right. So what I ended up doing with Substance is I started by just kind of overdriving my specularity map. So right now it's too bright. I know this isn't something I'm going to want to use. But what I did was I took this levels filter here. And so as I start to adjust the levels, you can see that I can actually tweak my specularity. So one of the very interesting things about Substance is that I can actually break each one of these level, your black in and high and low and those things, and I can actually come right over here and I can choose to expose that value. And what that does is it basically, when you import that substance into your host application, such as Maya, Unity, or Unreal, it allows me to be able to tweak that parameter in real time. So what I did was I just exposed all of my level controls to that root level of the substance. So now when I bring that back into Maya and I look at my specularity and it's just not really, I want to do some tweaks to that, maybe I want to do like a gamma adjustment or something like that, I can do that all from the substance node. So I make that adjustment, substance regenerates the texture, and now I never have to go back out, I never have to do anything. I can actually change my specularity map right there inside of Maya without having to go into another application. So what we end up having here is a graph, and that is end up, as I showed you in Maya before, that becomes what I assign to the head inside of Maya. What's very interesting about this graph is this is one file, but this file makes up several things. It makes up my diffuse, it makes up my subsurface, my normal, my specularity, and the displacement map that I want to work with. So typically you may have all of these maps on, in different locations and things like that, and like I said before, you have to link all these things, but since I have all these maps as part of a substance, all of those maps are embedded into one file. So I take that one file with me into Maya, the substance graph will then generate all these texture maps for me right there in the editor. So again, if we drop back into Maya, as I explained before, this is the substance material, and right here again we have our 3 graphs that we worked on. Then we have the 4 outputs that I'm working with: diffuse, normal, specular, emissive. I can dynamically change the resolution all the way up to 2K. So say for instance I wanted to work at this guy at 2K, but then maybe I want to output this for a different type resolution. Maybe this is an asset that may end up being on a web or something that's more mobile. I can easily go and change this to say 256 or 512. And then the substance material will then regenerate all these textures. So the textures that are created are here, here. These textures are filing nodes, as you know, at Maya. It will regenerate all those textures for me. So again, I don't have to have a host of textures. Maybe a way that you're used to working is, okay, I'm going to have a diffuse texture. It is a 1K texture. Now I'm going to go resize that in Photoshop to 512. 256. There's 3 textures that I have inside of my, Unreal Scene or my Unity or Maya, and then depending on the runtime or what platform I'm on, I'm going to switch between one of those 3 textures. So you've got 3 textures in your texture RAM. You got 3 textures you had to load into your final deployment. Whereas with Substance, you can just at runtime choose what platform you're on, regenerate the substance, and those textures will regenerate in size. So as I mentioned before, we ended up having a couple of effects. So like I said before, here is that specular amount. So really what that's doing is, if you think about it, on that level, I have that gamma value in that histogram. That's all this slider is. So it's going from 1 to 0. So if I drop this down to 0, all the specularity goes off. So I gave myself that ability to change all this stuff in Maya. Another way this works is, beyond just maybe tweaking your maps, is you could actually add different types of effects. So if we come up here to, let's take a look at the shirt graph. Again, the shirt graph works very similar. It's just another substance material. Now it is a separate material that I then just drag and drop onto the mesh of the geometry of the shirt. However, it's linking to that same substance file. So again, even before, like I had mentioned, which is actually really cool, is we said we had that graph that was taking care of our diffuse, normal, spec, and all that stuff. Well, we also have a shirt, and our hair also has all those properties: diffuse, spec, normal. So all those maps. So if we take a look at that, we might have 10 or 12 maps that the substance file has embedded into it. And as I bring that back into Maya, one file is going to handle 12 or so maps for me. So I don't have to juggle a bunch of file formats. So what we might do is come up to the substance parameter, and on this guy, I also have some specular map, but I also have this parameter called shirt age. So one of the things I did just for demo purposes is, we have this shirt here, and it's kind of clean, but this guy's kind of old and grumpy, so obviously he's been spilling soup on himself and all kinds of weird stuff. So we might want to, age up his shirt a bit. So let's just go in, and I'm just going to change this parameter to 1. And as I do that, the substance graph is going to go through and it's going to recalculate all the texture files for me. So right there, I now have a completely different look to my texture. So now this looks a bit better. So this looks like the guy's a bit more Mr. Grumples than just the one that we had before. And that's just a small example. There's a host of parameters. You could put maybe cuts on his face. You could have a texture of a Band-Aid or something like that you toggle on and off. So that's another part that I said at the very beginning of the presentation, where I talked about the real thing that I like the most about Substance is the textures are dynamic. They're not just your single, maybe at the very heart of them, yeah, it's a bitmap, but it's a bitmap that can be changed based on any parameter that you want. So it's a very amazing technology. So in the end, what I ended up doing, as I said before, is just using the Substance, outputted a bunch of file nodes, and then those file nodes are actually piped directly into the DirectX 11 shaders. So with the viewport with inside of Substance, I can actually look at that viewport as tessellation. So as we start to go back here into Substance, as I start to design my texture and work with this guy, phase, I could bring those textures into Mudbox so I could see how this texture is going to work as I start to build this guy up. And then finally, we bring this all back together inside of Maya. So that'll just about cover us here, and I really thank everyone for their time. And we also got some nice demos going on at the Allegorithmic booth. If you have any questions, please come by. I'd love to show you some demos and talk and answer any of your questions. Thank you.